In this video, I'm going to go in depth into what it means to do your original intent or your true will for taking this incarnation. I talk a lot about that over the course of my videos, this idea that you are an angel, you're essentially a spiritual being who took this incarnation with an intent. And now, having come into manifestation and being within the world of duality, you kind of forget that and then trying to remember that so you can fulfill that which your incarnation is perfectly suited to do, because this incarnation is something that you took because it perfectly carried out the universal will of humanity in exactly the way that you intended or could do so. And now you want to remember what you intended so you can actually fulfill that intent or that true will. The will of humanity is universal. It's in Hokmah on the tree of life. It's something that's basically one. It's just like this undifferentiated masculine force or active force of the divine. But then through each one of us, so then we each take an incarnation, and that form that we take is in the feminine side of God, it's Binah in the tree of life, and then we take it, and then hopefully we can remember what the heck we were doing here. So I'm going to go into some depth on that. The phrase true will is something that comes out of the philosophy of Thelema, which is meaning will. It means will. And the law of Thelema states, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. So in other words, doing exactly what you came here to do, fulfilling that exact intent with which you took this incarnation, is your law. So it's like that is the thing you must do, and it's the only thing that binds you. It's the only thing that you have to do. And everything else, so the idea is here, now forget about all the external moral rules as far as the specifics of them. Nothing's off the table as far as what you can do. Of course, in practice, you'll find that there are lots of things that conflict with the will. So I want to go a little bit in depth on the will, and then talk about how you can study your astrology chart to kind of to study your will, your true will. If you were to look up Thelema on the internet, you would find a lot of misleading or potentially even false information about it, because there's kind of a trend of folks who come to Thelema from other religions sometimes or oftentimes, and they've been burned and they've been told you're wrong to be this way, you can't do this, you're evil, you're sinful, and rightfully so, they reject those external condemnations, those external restraints on them that have nothing to do with their individual intent for coming here. So that's understandable. Now when they come to Thelema, especially with regard to sort of the sexual mores of Thelema, which have no potential, there's no outside restrictions, there's nothing that's wrong or sinful in principle, then they come here, and they go nuts, essentially, just thinking like, I can do whatever I want, I can do whomever I want, I can essentially, whatever I want to do, that's this new religion, Thelema, says that's okay. And that's a misconception, a strong misunderstanding of the idea of do what thou wilt. So I want to go into some depth on that, and then kind of go into your chart again, how you can look at that and find it in your chart, or at least help yourself remember by using your astrology chart as a prompt. So I want to also mention this idea of sin. So in Thelema, in the Book of the Law, it states the word of sin is restriction. And so the idea is anything that restricts the true will of humanity from being done through your incarnation, whether it's other people from the outside forces restricting you, or whether it's from your internal. Now your internal could be like false morals that you've internalized. It could also be desires that are incompatible, things you want to do but are incompatible with your will. So there's no telling what could be a sin ahead of time, except you have to discover that. And so that's something to keep in mind, because again, it's not what you want that determines whether something is a sin or not. There could be, I guess I want to just kind of emphasize that you could find doing your will at some given point, difficult, painful, etc. So, it's not that doing your will is a pleasant thing at all times, and that's not a good gauge for whether you're doing your will. So you have to study, you have to look at what's happening on Malkuth, your world, your universe, and read the signs to figure out, am I on track to actually contributing to the true will of humanity? Because again, this is a cosmic will, it's God's will. So it's like saying, do God's will as it comes down through your incarnation. And that's the only thing you have the right to do. But if you do that, you have every right in the world, and all will go your way. So I just want to read a few passages and then get into your chart. So I'm reading from Heart of the Master. Of course, yes, okay, good. I'm so afraid this would be backward on the screen. This is a book by the Master Therion, which is a title of Aleister Crowley. And I just want to read a couple of passages here. So here's a good sentence that kind of gives you a good idea of what true will really looks like on the ground. He says, "Now did I understand that all men live in sin, being balked of their true will." Balked means blocked from. He goes, "That is, of the free function of their essential nature. This restriction cometh much from their ignorance of what their true will is, and much from external hindrance, but most of all from the interference of ill-controlled parts of their own instruments, the body and mind." And I'll say that one more time. Most of all, from the interference of ill-controlled parts of their own instruments, the body and mind. So let's just pause on that for a second, on this whole thing. So first of all, that again, it's the true will is the free flow of your essential nature. So when you're studying your chart, you're trying to figure out, what is my essential nature? You're looking at the planets. Each of those planets is a chakra, and it's basically by you seeing a planet in a house and sign, it's saying is the way, the how is the sign, and the department of life, that's the house, in which to allow chakra, and that's the planet, the free flow of your essential nature. So this is like the how. So it's like a how-to map of how to best align. Of course, getting everything flowing in one holistic way is an art. It takes time. But in any case, so that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to figure out what your essential nature is and allow it the free function. So when you figure something out about yourself, your essential nature, if you notice that it's being hindered by something you're doing, some thought of your mind or some desire of your body, that's actually getting in the way of you expressing yourself correctly or allowing that essential nature to flow, then you need to change something. So again, that's already suggesting that it's not just about other people not letting you do what you want to do. It's probably far more. And if you are on the path of the great work, I'm sure you've discovered this. It's stuff that you do that prevents the true will from flowing through you. So it takes a lot of noticing patterns that are destructive to that and then correcting them. It's a long process. Okay, it's not that simple. And then I'll just read a little bit longer here, because again, this is the path of freedom. But what is freedom? It's not do whatever you want. For freedom is not found in looseness and lack of governance, but in the right ruling of each individual of the common weal, that means well-being, so as to assure his own well-being no less than that of the whole. So the idea is, if you, to the extent that you are successful in actually allowing your essential nature to operate without any interference from your bad habits, your desires, your fears, your hopes, your dreams, your illusions, all those things that are false, and as well as other people, trying to stop you from doing stuff, then not only will you have well-being, but the whole will have well-being. And why is that? Because every individual, and the Kabbalah says every individual is a microcosm of the cosmos. So literally, if I am, insignificant as I may be, or my destiny may not be great, or whatever, as insignificant as I am, in the social realm, I'm certainly insignificant. But if I, to the extent that I am able to actually express my true nature without interference from me or anybody else, to that extent, the true will, the will of God, is actually flowing through me, and everything that I do is benefiting not just me, but the whole. So basically the idea is that that true will and Hokmah is something that is something common. We all partake of the one and same will. And so everybody's got like their little job to do in that cosmos. And the more that each person, the more that different stars, different people actually figure out what their essential nature is and do it, the more the common benefits from that. So all of humanity will benefit from that if you do it. They don't have to know about it. You don't have to be great. So that's the idea behind that, is that it's actually, we're all a little spark of God, so to speak, and we're trying to do the true will, and we have to figure it out on our own. Nobody can tell us, like, you shouldn't have sex outside of marriage, or you should have sex outside of marriage, or whatever it may be. So these are things you have to figure out about yourself. What is most authentic, and then do that. I had other passages marked here. I think I'm going to skip it for now, but actually, I will say one thing. I'm just going to kind of emphasize something, which is, let me just read this is from The Method of Thelema. It's an essay, and this is in a book called The Revival of Magic and Other Essays. And it's just a very short passage here. So, the law of Thelema. The formula of this law is, do what thou wilt. Its moral aspect is simple enough in theory. Do what thou wilt does not mean do as you please, although it implies this degree of emancipation, that it is no longer possible to say a priori, in other words, ahead of time, that a given action is wrong. Each man has the right, and an absolute right, to accomplish his true will. So when people say, the idea that you can do whatever you want, it's not that you can. And do the true will, but it is true. What is true is that there's this much freedom involved, as far as there's nothing off the table. There's nothing ahead of time that anybody can say about what you can or can't do. Certainly nobody else can say it, and you can't say it either. You have to figure out, okay, given the infinite universe of possibilities, now there's nothing that's in principle restricted from me. What's actually restricted from me based on my chart, my true nature, etc., my experience. So it isn't simple. It's actually harder than following a normal religion, where maybe a pastor tells you exactly how to live or something, what to read, when, where, who to sleep with, what to eat, how to celebrate. All those things are, you have to figure this out. So that's the story of true will. I also wanted to again emphasize one last point, and then I'll get into your chart, which is this idea about happiness and stuff. So there's a lot of times people get upset, and even Thelemites get upset when the idea is brought up that there's something, some freedom that they can't have based on their true will. It's to them, it's just almost like an article of faith that that no religion that they would follow would ever restrict them from doing whatever they want, whenever they want, and anything that tries to do that is just plain wrong, no matter what. And one of the things about Thelema is, and paradox of Thelema. There's a good book by Jack Parsons called "Freedom is a Two-Edged Sword." So this is something to study. Is that when you really get into this philosophy, you realize that you have to respect everyone else's will. You could say before, at least as much as, if not more so, than your own. So, there's a lot of allowing that has to happen, a lot of tolerance of difference of opinions, difference of action, difference of ways of life. And you draw the line at, somebody actually actively, physically getting in your way one way or another of doing your will. Okay, that's a problem. You can stop. That's wrong in Thelema. But it's a lot. It's not just I'll do whatever I want, everyone else be damned, because that completely ignores the fact that every being that comes here has a true will. And if you're stopping them from doing it, you're violating not only their law, but again, yours, because Hokmah is common to all of us. So it's not that simple. Learning how to live as a Thelemite is definitely not reflected, let's say, in the present political reality in the United States, where everyone is just like wanting to suppress anything that's different from what they are. And I don't care what side of the divide you're on any given issue. You just see this everywhere, the opposite of what Thelema would tell you to do, which is communicate with people, figure out what they're actually coming from, what values they're coming from. Let's see how we can all live, so to speak, in peace. I mean, there's sometimes when conflict happens, but in any case, you're not always going to be happy. That's the main point I want to say. And so now I'm reading from one of the main, or maybe the main holy text in Thelema, the Book of the Law, Liber al vel legis. And in chapter 1, verse 31, we read, "For these fools of men and their woes care thou not at all. They feel little. What is balanced by weak joys, but ye are my chosen ones." Okay, so again, let me just read that again. "For these fools of men and their woes care not thou at all. They feel little. What is balanced by weak joys, but ye are my chosen ones." So there's this idea that the yelping and the pain and the complaining and the screaming that we hear from most people is not anything we need to care about, and that includes ourselves. So there's a part of us that always wants to, complain and moan and cry and scream when things don't go exactly as our ego believes it should do. But that is said to be, that's not of our essential self. So there's a critique of the ego. It's not that the ego is wrong, because the whole idea of us being individuals is completely rooted in our ego. So Thelema embraces the ego, but it doesn't enshrine it. And so that's this idea of weak joy. So something that's a temporary satisfaction of what the ego wants, which is definitely temporary because things are constantly changing, is not something we need to worry about. And likewise, there's an idea that, I'll actually read the line right before it, chapter 1, verse 30. "This is the creation of the world, that the pain of division is as nothing, and the joy of dissolution all." Once again, this is the creation of the world, that the pain of division is as nothing, and the joy of dissolution all. So the idea is that although the dissatisfactions that we experience, the pain and the suffering that we experience as egos on planet Earth is pain, it is as nothing. It's basically like, don't worry about it. You have to kind of learn to rise above it. Whereas the joy of dissolution is all. What is dissolution? Well, this gets very complicated in terms of the idea that also love is the law, love under will. And what is love? And love is this uniting of opposites. So the satisfaction of a natural desire, or the natural function of some part of you, your essential nature, that basically coming together with its opposite and then annihilating and is dissolving. And so it's, I'm not going to get into that, but the point is, Thelema is not what it seems on the surface, and it's certainly not what you're going to see on the internet if you read the memes and things like that. So how do you figure out your true will in your chart? First of all, your entire chart, as I said, is the structure of your incarnation. So you're obviously, in some ways it's the whole chart. And, if you've tried to learn astrology, it takes a long time. And essentially there's no end to it. You can continually master it, and I hope you do. But I've said before in other videos, so there's sort of two parts to the chart. There's the things that reflect you at the being level, or you at the level of your choice to take this incarnation as an angel. And those are the part of fortune and the lunar nodes. So I have videos on those that I'll link below. Those show you basically if you read the lunar nodes, you can actually kind of like learn about your past lives, at least indirectly, because what you're seeing there is the tendencies that you've built up over lifetime, over lifetime, over lifetime, and therefore the trajectory that you have to take in order to undo that hypnosis, or that strong habit that almost like doesn't allow you to be free. It binds you in a negative way because it's so ingrained, so habitual, so mechanical. So you want to become aware of that, and you can study your South Node, and you can draw on the strength of what you've learned to do. Also, it's not bad to have a routine that you've already sort of like, it's so easy you can just do it automatically, but you want to be able to push off in that opposite direction of your North Node. So check out videos on that. Now, the part of fortune, in some ways you could say it's your true will, but it's in a very limited sense. So it's your true will in the sense that it takes your sun, moon, and rising, which are your spirit, your animal self, and your elemental self. So in other words, sun, moon, earth, and it combines those into one point in your chart, and basically shows you where you have to focus to gain the harmony of this incarnation. So you basically, your sweet spot, your point of being able to harmonize everything that you're doing, make things easier, make things flow well. So that's good. And in some ways you could say that's your true will, but obviously that's limited because it isn't showing you more of the meat. It's kind of like the bones, but not the meat. So then there's your planets. And each one of those planets represents something that has to do with the true will. So I already told you that the whole chart is like it's like Binah. It's like your structure that it's like, okay, this is the specific individual, unique way that I'm going to channel the true will this time around. Now, Binah in the chart is Saturn. So you can look at your Saturn to say, what is that essential structure? What is my law? And I have some videos on Saturn as well, because you can find out, like, what is that, what is it that binds me and separates me, but also gives me my unique strengths and weaknesses, that unique perspective. It's Saturn that will really kind of separate you from everything else once you're manifested here in your form. So that's a very useful thing to contemplate at certain times, especially if you're trying to figure, if things aren't going your way. Let's say if you're upset and you're not liking the way life is going, maybe you're constantly getting distracted. You want to be more spiritual. You want to do the great work, but you're finding yourself constantly forgetting or falling out of it, or getting into fights with people, or whatever it may be. Something is not right. It's just kind of like a law, or a corollary to the law of Thelema, that if you're constantly in conflict with someone's out of orbit of their star. They're actually infringing on someone else's universe. Now, it could be the other person, in which case the answer is get the hell out of there and get out of their ambit, so you don't have to deal with them. That's one solution. And another solution is it's you, and then what are you doing? How are you stepping on their universe? So anyways, if you study your Saturn, you can learn how to not do that. How to basically figure out how you should behave, how you should behave towards others, towards yourself. And you can apply it in any question you want to, sexually, you could be financially, any question you want. You can say, well, what does my law say? And look at your Saturn. Now, Uranus in your chart is Hokmah, it's the true will. So the true will in general, of course, is completely undifferentiated. It's just one force that's the life force of everything that you can see. However, in your chart, it will tell you what your genius is. So, as I said, I talked about it in another video that I just posted, how you have a representative of your angel or angelic self in Mercury, which is your daemon. It's an elemental helper figure, which will take messages back and forth. So if you're looking to develop a relationship with your angel or your genius, then you look at your Mercury by sign and house. However, the actual genius, sort of like where lightning strikes, where the gnosis will illuminate your incarnation, if you work with it correctly, will be shown by sign and house of your Uranus. So in a more conventional astrological interpretation, it's like this sort of like common human force of sudden change, which is true too. I mean, if you look at things on a more history level or things like that, that's certainly accurate. But as far as you as an individual, it's your genius. And genius does change things suddenly. So wherever, if Uranus is, for example, transiting through a house, meaning it's one place in your birth chart and it's there for your whole life, but of course the planets keep moving. And so if you look at, well, where's Uranus now and what house is it now? If it's going through one of your houses, strange sudden changes, you know, are happening in that department of your life. In any case, and that's your genius too, but in any case, that look at your, I would recommend, especially if you're beginning, to only focus on your birth chart, just to keep things simple. You can also look at, and you can look at every single planet that there is, but your Mars will tell you how you should and how you do, you know, naturally, your natural expression of your force of action in the world. For men, this is oftentimes also their sexuality, because it's the male force. It's like, as it's translated through the incarnation as opposed to just in general. But for anybody at all, that principle of how do you assert yourself, essentially, you know, the idea is like, I am an individual, how do I assert myself in what department of life, the house, and in what manner, the sign. So you want to figure out, how does your Mars naturally act, by studying those things, and then, you know, figure out what that actually looks like on the ground and how you do that. Venus is your love nature, how you relate. And, you know, quintessentially in Thelema, it's how do you relate to your angel, because ultimately, in one sense, everything in your universe and every individual that you meet is the face of your angel or your God. You, in other words. So in some sense, everything is you, and then Venus is telling you, well, this is the best way to relate to those others that are the hidden aspect of yourself. So again, by sign and house. Jupiter is like your highest aspirations. It's in Kabbalah, it's Hesed, the number 4. So the idea is it's order. So you're looking at what is my divine order when manifested. So how do I produce order? How do I live my highest, my real, true, deepest, highest values, which, you know, may not be something that your consciousness is aware of. So then you look at your Jupiter. It's also, by the way, because of that, oftentimes Jupiter is associated with good luck, because it's this force of expansion. It's like the will expanded in the 4 directions. So you can sort of figure out, well, how do I take advantage of, you know, my will? How do I actually establish my order in my universe? And that's your Jupiter. I've already talked about Saturn. I've kind of skipped around. I apologize. Pluto. So Pluto is very interesting, because it is a planet that actually isn't truly a sphere on the tree of life. It's called Thoth, and that is between. It's sort of like between the pure potential realm of the top 3 Sephiroth, and then everything manifested below. So it's like between pure potential and actuality and manifestation. There is the linking factor, and specifically, it's a dynamic force of desire, essentially. It's like, so there's a desire. It's almost like the desire of the masculine and feminine of the cosmos to unite with each other. So that's through Pluto. And in an individual's incarnation, it's something that's almost like a driving urge, the most fervent desire that you have. And essentially, because of that, it creates power, because there's this constant force of pushing you forward or pulling you forward. And then the trick is to control it, because you don't want to wield Pluto for ill, you know, in other words, for selfish aims, which means well, I shouldn't say selfish, not for egoic, illusory, false aims, but rather for the common will. So figuring out what your Pluto is like is one thing, and then actually controlling it is another. For some people, it's much easier than others, depending on the placement. So that is also, we could also consider that the force of magic, or the serpent force. So it's a very powerful, transformative force, you know, of life and death, and making things happen in a very magical way. And so that's very worth studying if you're interested in wielding power. But again, you want to make sure that you wield power and not it wields you. So it's trying to do it. It's always aiming for the common good, or the common will of humanity with that. What have I left out? Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune. I haven't said anything about Neptune yet. So Neptune in the Tree of Life is Kether, which is the highest Sephirah below the 0. It's number 1. And it is basically the universal I am. So that Kether is like the highest spiritual. Speaking of dissolving, it's the dissolving force, in which everything that seems to be separate is realized as one with everything else. So this is a very high, powerful spiritual force, very, very much about the all rather than just the individual and their petty ideas of what's good or desirable. So wherever Neptune is in your chart, potentially is a place of high spirituality. And then the only thing there is, so it's like, how do I exercise that most spiritual part of myself by sign and house? So then the only thing is, sometimes it's, really hard for the ego. And if it is hard for the ego, and if the ego resists enough, then what you get is escapism. So whenever you feel like you want to, like, get drunk or, party in a way that's to run away from difficulty, we've all been there. That's basically Neptune in its negative manifestation, where it's all too much, because sometimes, the ego does have defenses, and that's not entirely wrong. So what we do want to break them down, but we don't want to do it all at once, because then you would just go nuts. You want to work with the ego gently enough to where you're keeping it in balance at all times, and also being aware of it, because there's always things that you're not aware of that are coming into play. Most of what we are is not visible or conscious, and that's something we've learned since Freud. This in the last couple of centuries, is that it's something that our essential self is much bigger than what we're aware of. And so, we're working in deep regions of the psyche. Things can get really crazy if we're not gentle and careful and controlled and balanced and clean about it. So that's why we do rituals of cleansing, such as the banishing ritual of the pentagram. That's why in Thelema, we do a ritual oftentimes called Liberet, which is just like basically stationing with the sun 4 times a day, so that we're always balancing the 4 elements in ourselves, and also, of course, reminding ourselves of our solar nature, the sun. And the sun in the astrology chart is that center of your ego or consciousness, and it's certainly your deepest sense of yourself as a conscious being. So it's definitely good to know that identity, that ego identity, is your sun. And to work with it as it is and not fight it, but at the same time use that to balance everything else, because just like the sun is the center of your solar system, the sun in your chart is the center of your conscious awareness, which is how you work with all of these things in balance. Obviously, this video is more conceptual than practical, because I just buzzed through so many different things, but I think it's important, just to summarize the whole thing, is that each of those planets is a chakra. So for example, the sun is the heart chakra, Venus is the chakra called Manipura, and the moon is the Muladhara chakra, the Mercury is Svadhisthana chakra. I know I'm missing a few here, I apologize. So the idea is, like, all these chakras are energy vortices, or centers of energy that spin, and you're working with them gently, you're working with them in tandem with each other, and you're basically learning how they function in you, so that you can figure out, okay, what is blocking them? You don't want that to be blocked. That's that free flow. But again, unblock it gently, slowly, over time, and always working in balance. So the true will isn't what you want. The true will is that universal life force working through your chakra system without being restricted or blocked. That's pretty much what it is. And all these ideas of human happiness and paradise, all these things that we want, I'm not saying they're wrong, okay? I'm not saying that, but they are wrong when they conflict with the free function of your essential nature. Since I did the video on the true will, I thought of something I wanted to add, because it's a big question that comes up a lot. So a lot of times folks will say things like, it's my true will to be a musician, or it's my true will to be a writer. And I wanted to address that, because even though the true will, as I said before, is like the free flow functioning of your chakras, essentially, the will of God through your incarnation in a very You can almost look at it as this very holistic sense. It's very impersonal. At the same time, that's not bunk. I mean, that is a legitimate way to look at your true will. Is like if you're called. Sometimes people have a calling that they can put a name on. Not everybody does, but you may have always, since you were a kid, known that music was it for you, and you knew that you were going to be a singer or something like that. Well, that there is a way in which you could say that's your true will. Of course, the specifics of how you do that, you still have to kind of study the law, your chart, how things are going on in your universe, etc. But essentially, like when I do a reading for somebody, for example, if someone asks me that broad question, like what is my will? Of course, I can't know their will, but if I'll tell them a story, and the story tries to basically take everything in the chart and say, well, this is like as though this was the story that of what you came here to do. And sometimes you can tell yourself a story like that. Sometimes you realize, you know what? Writing is really the thing that allows me to fulfill all of these different planets and different houses and signs that actually all ties together. Because one thing I didn't talk about is not the planets aren't just on their own. They're making a relationship or what are called aspects to each other. So the way things are connected and flowing together, it makes sense that I'm a writer, or it makes sense that I'm a mom, or whatever it may be. There's things that you basically kind of like encapsulate, or mom's a good example because in one sense it could be a lifelong thing, but of course in another sense it could be a big part of your life, and then there's another phase afterwards. So maybe you take that and change it or express something new. So it's not so don't worry if there's not one thing that seems to like encapsulate everything. That's a simple label, but could there be? Yeah, there could be. So that's just something I wanted to add, is that there sometimes one function, farmer, ties together everything that you basically are here to do. Of course, the specifics, again, you got to kind of work with that. But so don't be afraid to have a label, but also don't worry about it if you really don't.